So I'm Kaija Langley. My debut picture book is When Langston Dances, and I have been writing probably since I was about 7. But this is my first book in the world, and so I'm very excited to have it.
That's amazing. So you always knew that you wanted to be an author?
I did. I think I started writing poetry, you know, once I went to I think I was at a dentist office and they had the little highlight magazines, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, I love these little poems. And then I went home and I wanted to try the little poems, and yeah, I started making my own little poems, and I sort of figured I was onto something because one of my classmates had taken it to school, given it to my teacher. She read it aloud in class, and one of
Mm.
my classmates accused me of plagiarism. And so
Oh,
he's like, that you couldn't have possibly written that. You must have copied that from a book. And I thought, okay, there might be something here. So
it's
there
not
you
that
go.
professional, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you've talked about how you were always a big reader growing up, but that you were it wasn't until you were a preteen that you actually read a book by a Black author. What effect does that have on kids when they're able to one see themselves in books, but especially when they're getting these authentic own voices stories? What effect does that have on kids?
Um, I think it's eye-opening. I mean, to be honest, I didn't see my first book until I was about 12 that had a young Black girl on the cover. It was
Hmm.
written by an African American woman, and it featured the story about a family in the South sort of navigating race and class. And my family was from the South, but up until that point, I was hooked on Nancy Drew mysteries. I loved all the Judy Blume books, and I don't think it actually occurred to me until I held another book in my hand that had a different representation that I was missing that. I
Mm,
just assumed all books didn't have people in it that looked like me.
that's
And
just the way it was,
so
right?
that's just the way it was. I didn't really question it. And then all of a sudden at 12, I get this book as a birthday present, and it's like, the light bulb goes off like, oh wait,
Hmm.
there actually are other stories, and there's stories that I actually understand and have a lived experience with. And
Mm.
so I think it's incredibly powerful. I won't tell you how long ago I was 12, but even today it's incredibly powerful because when I go for school visits, I can't tell you how many times I see young readers, and they walk in, particularly little African American children. They walk in. I'm clearly standing in the front of the classroom. I've got a book in my hand, and they are looking around the room, wondering where is the author.
Wow.
And even then, they don't make the connection that the person holding the book could have been the person who'd written the book.
Wow.
So it's powerful on so many levels for young readers to realize that not only are there stories in the world that share their lived experience and represent their lived experience, but that the people who write them also have that lived experience.
Right. And just for those that are curious, what was the book that you read? I know I think I saw it on your website, but what was it?
It was Mildred D. Taylor's "Roll of Thunder, Hear Me Cry,"
Right.
and
So,
that was part of a trilogy. So
oh, I didn't realize it was. I read that when I was a kid. I didn't realize it was part of a trilogy.
mhm,
So when you came to write your own book, When Langston
mhm.
Dances, can you tell us what was the inspiration behind it? And if for people who haven't read it yet, you really need to. It is so beautiful and so different, I think, than most other children's books out there.
Thank you for that. So I had a number of inspirations. First and foremost, I took dance class when I was young, from about 5 to 10. And when I do school visits, I often bring photos of what I look like through that age range. And they look at the photos and they look at me and they look at the photos again, and it's sort of funny. But so I already had a love of dance.
Mhm.
My mother was a school teacher, and she loved the arts, so she was a big reader. She took me to the theater. She often took me to musicals,
Mm.
plays. You know, concerts, all kinds of things. So I'd been sort of exposed to and dance performances um, growing up. So I was sort of familiar with having that exposure,
Mhm.
and so I already sort of had dance in my corner, so to speak. And
Mhm.
then I went to Baltimore, and my youngest godson, who at the time was 8, his name is Langston. was twirling around the living room, and I was watching him move his body. He just seemed so comfortable and so fluid and so happy. And I asked him, I said, what you doing? You're looking like you're having a good time. And he's like, oh, I'm dancing, and I'm in a ballet class. And he was
Oh, sorry, I think your audio was cutting out. You said you asked him what he was doing, and he said he was in a ballet class?
Yes, yes. Can you still hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay. All right. So he was in a ballet class. He was the only boy in his ballet class.
Mm.
But the thing that struck me was him saying, and when I grow up, I want to dance on stages around the world.
Mm.
And it was that kind of conviction that he had that sort of sparked the story for me, this idea of how many other boys are in the country and the world who are drawn to dance, ballet, hip hop. There are lots of forms, who may not see themselves represented in literature, particularly at that age range. And then, shortly thereafter, I went to a performance at Jacob's Pillow, which happens to be in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, and it's a summer dance festival of, performers from around the globe who come and dance in the Berkshires every summer. And quite literally, it was in between the performances that the story, if seeing Langston and knowing he was the only boy in his class sparked the story, it basically caught on fire at Jacob's Pillow. In between performances, I started writing the story out in my head because I realized, well, here he is at 8 wanting to be a dancer when he grew up, and here I am watching dancers grown up and knowing that there's a journey in between there that requires a lot of discipline and perseverance and training of one's body to move in the way that dancers move. So that was the inspiration, and it came fairly quickly and fairly easily. Although I won't say that there weren't many revisions.
Right. And what does he think about the book?
Oh, he loves the book. He thinks it's great. His older brother Trevor, who's more of a basketball player, says, "Well, when are you going to write a book about me?" And I said, "No, I didn't write a book. I wrote a book inspired by Langston. I didn't write a book for Langston."
Right. Well, and one of the things that makes it so unique, like you talked about, is that it challenges a number of stereotypes. One about boys in dance, especially ballet, but particularly a young Black boy in dance. And there's so few books about boys who enjoy dance, like I said, especially ballet, but hardly anything about young Black boys doing ballet. What do you hope that readers take away from reading the book?
Well, a few things. I hope that young readers sort of take away that it's okay to follow a passion, even if that passion is not something that society appreciates of them and their gender. So that's first and foremost for readers themselves. For people who love young people, I want them to take away a number of things. One, that exposure is really important. Expose young people to a variety of things. In Langston's case, his mom takes him to see the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. And that's what sparks for him this idea that he likes basketball and he's athletically inclined, but there are other ways to be in your body. And so, I want adults to understand that they shouldn't necessarily push the gender conformity of, oh, well, you're a boy, so you should go to basketball, football, soccer, whatever. You're a girl, you get to do dance and gymnastics and what have you.
Right.
There are no hard and fast lines that keep children from exploring the things that really bring them joy. And so, I want children to understand also that whether it's dance or anything else that they're interested in, that when you really have a passion for something, you really enjoy doing something, that it requires some time and some tension, and you don't just do it once and drop it. And if you do, that's okay. But if you really want to excel in it, if you really want to continue to do it, you have to keep showing up.
Right. Right. And you really do show that, like, his journey. It's not just like, oh, I want to be a dancer and then that's it. He, you suddenly see him performing. It talks about how he really has to work at it, and kind of, I love the very end of it where it shows him kind of advances several years at a time, and then you can see him until he finally is on stage. why did you want to make sure to include that people see that whole journey that he has to take from kind of the inspiration and the passion, but also the work that he has to put into it?
And that's exactly it. I wanted to show the full journey. I wanted readers to understand that he didn't go to dance class one day and said, okay, now I'm going to be a ballet dancer. You know, the teacher informs him that you have to sort of work hard to be a dance,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and to be a ballet player. And so it was important to have that depicted in the story. It's somewhat unusual in a picture book to age a character. Usually they start one age and they end the same age. But I was really intentional with Langston because I did want to show that trajectory of him moving from that very first day of class and being in his basketball sneakers and his basketball outfit and excelling in dance as he grew older.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't take credit for the illustrations because Keith Mallett did a phenomenal job.
Yes.
And that was the only sort of direction, illustrative direction I gave was, you know, at the end of the story, you see Langston at like age 6, and then you'll see him again at around 12, and then you'll see him again at around 16, so that the reader really sees the progression.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the teacher, and I think that was something that also stood out to me about the book is the supportive adults that
Mm-hmm.
Langston has in his life. Although some of the other kids seem to be a little skeptical, but his mom is so supportive, and even the teacher, because I actually, honestly, I was expecting a little more skepticism from the teacher, but she was really wonderful too. And the mom is all supportive all through the book, and even like you mentioned before about the exposure. You know, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't just that she encouraged him when she had this idea, but it was thanks to her that he then considered doing dance, that was an option for him. What role can parents or and other adults, you know, the teacher was adults in his neighborhood, what role can we play in encouraging kids' dreams?
Yeah, you know, both in his mom, in the form of his mom and Miss Marie, who's a dance teacher, you know, they're both cheerleaders and champions. You know, his
Mm-hmm.
mom exposes him to dance and takes him to dance, and then upon his own sort of self-direction, he decides, wait a minute, I can do that with my body, and I'm going to practice on my own at home.
Mm-hmm.
And when he goes to his mom and says, you know, well, I want to dance, and his mom says, well, of course you can dance. We all have a role as adults in young people's lives to sort of be and see what they're expressing, what
Mm-hmm.
they're interested in, the ways that they are self-directed in choosing to be in the world. It's not up to us to sort of dictate for them. They're just, you know, they're like little sponges. They take in so much information and they're learning so many new things because they haven't been exposed to it yet in the world. So first and foremost, expose them to a variety of things. You know, take the boys to ballet dances, take the girls to football games. You know, enough with all the sort of the gender
Right.
confinements that we place on children. And now, of course, we live in a world where gender's not binary, and it really never has been. So the more fluid we allow children to be in expressing themselves, their identities, their interests, the better and more, you know, cared for and loved and balanced they will
Mm-hmm.
grow to be into the world. So be a cheerleader and a champion. You see a young person in your life and you can see that they are heading in a certain direction, or they're taking a real interest in a certain, you know, outlet, whatever it may be. Don't shut it down. You know,
Mm-hmm.
allow them that space to explore and to ask questions and to support them in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, initially when I wrote the story, there wasn't even that little boy who sort of gives some pushback, and you know, I got some feedback that it wasn't completely believable in the world that we live in that a little
Right.
boy would be dancing through the streets and nobody would say anything,
Mm-hmm.
that he was just 100%
Right.
supported. And that felt authentic to the story when I finally sort of went through it. And as I mentioned, the when I started the book, it was actually written in rhyme. And by the time, you know, you see it now in the world, it obviously isn't, but it went through at least 12 rounds of revision.
And why did you make the change, the switch from having it be rhyme to not?
That was pretty early on. I want to say maybe by about before I'd even given it to my agent to look at.
Mm,
It had probably gone through about 6 revisions before then.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's surprising, I think, to a lot of people because you talk about a picture book that's only maybe 500 or 600 words. How hard could that be? But
Right.
it takes a lot to,
Mm-hmm.
um, get the language right, to get the emotion right. There's the lyrical vein, there's the emotional vein,
Mm-hmm.
and then of course there's actually sort of connecting with a young reader where you can't be pedantic and tell them things. You have to let them experience it for themselves and come to those conclusions. And so when I visit schools and I speak to young people, they definitely pick up that Langston has a bully. He's got a kid who's not being kind to him.
Mm-hmm.
And they also pick up that the mom is very supportive and the teacher is welcoming.
Mm-hmm.
So, without having to say, and people in society don't really
Right.
like the boys dance.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't, that's not going to resonate with a young person who's experiencing the world the way they do.
Mm-hmm. And since you mentioned that, I'm curious, what other feedback have you gotten from readers when you go do these visits?
They tell me the book is beautiful, and I always
Mm-hmm.
say, well, thank you. I'll let Keith know because I didn't make the illustration. Um, I think they're also very surprised by the process of making a book. They have a lot of questions about, how do you make a book? What goes into that?
Mm-hmm.
And many people, adults and children, are surprised that in the picture book process, fairly often the illustrator and the writer, if you aren't the one in the same, don't have a lot of contact in the process.
Right.
You give them the manuscript, they do the artwork, and then you hope for the best. But
Was that hard to kind of release your book
mhm.
into the world and hand it over to somebody else in a sense?
It was incredibly hard because I
Mm-hmm.
had no idea. I mean, I was familiar with Keith's work and I liked his work, so I didn't think he would completely mess it up, but I
Right.
just wasn't sure. The book has a little boy dancing and moving and twirling and jumping and
Mm-hmm.
leaping. I didn't want it to be comedic. I
Right.
wanted it to be realistic. I wanted it to be relevant and relatable, and I wasn't sure how he was going to capture all that motion. And of course, he did a phenomenal job with it. So it was very scary. And I will also say I get a lot of questions about his basketball outfit, which
Oh,
of
really?
course I had nothing to do with. I never said, and he should appear in a basketball outfit.
Mm-hmm.
That was all, Keith's, artistic direction and brilliance that
Mm-hmm.
he put him in a little basketball outfit. And so they say, oh, well, you know, is red his favorite color? Is that really his number? What, what team does he, like they really, they understand that it's based on a real
Right.
person, that it's not his story. It's
Mm-hmm.
inspired by him. But they also really connect with the illustrations, and they really sort of feel like Langston is real, even before they know that Langston's real.
That's funny. Well, that just shows how powerful the book is, that they just feel like this is a real person that they can relate to. And
Yeah.
it is, for those of you that are watching, if you haven't seen it yet, you really ought to check it out. It's a beautiful book, and we are coming up on the end of our time, so I wanted to end by talking about, well, one, I forgot to mention that it has been nominated for a 53rd NAACP Image Award in the Outstanding Literary Work for Children category. So congratulations, that is
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
can you give us a preview of what you're working on now or other books that you have coming out?
Yes, I am in this very moment, this week. In fact, I'm turning in my next round of edits on a middle grade verse novel that's coming out next spring. So probably May 2023. It's called The Order of Things. And it's about a young 11-year-old girl who aspires to be a drummer, and she grows up, and her best friend is also a violin prodigy, and a lot of unexpected things happen, and she still has to figure out if she's going to navigate her way towards being a drummer. So that's coming out with Nancy Paulson Books, and then a second picture book, also with Janine Milner Books, is coming out in fall of 2024. That one is called A Century for Caroline, and it's about a young girl who meets her great grandmother on her 100th birthday and asks about the secret to long life.
Lose yourself to dance.